The internet has transformed communication as we know it, but with all of the information, entertainment, shopping, and unparalleled social access comes a darker side of the web, filled with computer viruses, controversial communities, and of course uncountable amounts of internet trolls. Online trolls are to some funny, to some annoying, and in the opinions of some, occasionally even dangerous, but nonetheless are a highly relevant phenomenon of our current time. But what exactly is trolling? This question can be difficult to pin down. According to Merriam-Webster, a troll is a person who intentionally antagonizes others online by posting inflammatory, irrelevant, or offensive comments or other disruptive content. Of course, we all know a troll when we see one online, at least we think, but in words the concept can be hard to describe or differentiate from other forms of debauchery, such as pranks, satire, and bullying. Perhaps the difference from these other terms, which often result in lighthearted amusement, is trolls are mostly trying to provoke a negative reaction out of the person or community they are trolling, often to expose some kind of hypocrisy at best, or for evil amusement at worst. Indeed, there was a time before the term troll meant what it does online today, as there are, of course, the trolls of 17th century folklore, but this shared term seems accidental. The word troll comes instead from the fishing term, a line or a bait used in trolling for fish, which does seem like a decent analogy for online trolls today. Society has been in the internet age for many years now, and there are no signs of trolling slowing down anytime soon. In moments when experiencing trolls' negative behavior online, it is hard not to reminisce about the past before the internet and social media, when things were simpler and trollless. But as you meditate or go for your morning jog in nature to try to just get away from it all, don't feel too sorry for yourself, because trolls have actually always been hiding within the layers of society, even before the internet. Indeed, trolling behavior has been around to some degree since the start of humanity, and certainly by the time of ancient Greece. Diogenes of Sinope, the ancient Greek philosopher, born in 404 BC, was certainly the biggest troll of all the classical era's great minds. A cynic, Diogenes rejected all material items and effectively lived as a beggar, living in a wine barrel, provoking others, calling out their hypocrisies, and boasting more than anything that he was above the need for material wealth and the petty rat race of the Greeks' developing culture. Virtue, he believed, came solely from within, and thus he would rub it in everyone's face how little he cared for their well-ordered society. For example, he was a notable rival of Plato and would eat loudly on purpose during his lectures to satirize the overly serious nature of his intellectual contemporaries. Diogenes famously admired the simplicity of a dog, often purposely personifying a dog in public, respecting that they don't complain about what they eat, will sleep anywhere, and believed humans should be more like man's best friend. One of his most famous stunts was walking around in broad daylight with a lantern, running up to people proclaiming that he was looking for an honest man, implying everyone else had lost their sense of natural self. Certainly a bizarre figure, he was never married and would masturbate in public, but as time went on, he eventually started to gain the respect of his community, as like his antics or not, he did do as he preached. It is rumored later in his life, he was complimented by Alexander the Great, with the epic war leader saying if he wasn't Alexander, he would want to be Diogenes. Alexander told Diogenes he would grant him any request, to which he replied, "Stand out of my light." Similar to internet trolls today, perhaps what Diogenes was trying to do more than anything is poke fun at people who take life too seriously and bait them into a realization of their own hypocrisy. A life dedicated to his trolling craft, his relentless actions cemented his outlook on life in ancient Greek philosophy. Fast forward to the stuffy and elite world of European classical music in the late 18th century, which just seemed primed for some good old-fashioned trolling. Accomplished Austrian composer Joseph Hadyn in 1781, amongst an elite and distinguished audience including the Viennese Duke's wife, introduced a new piece, his string quartet Opus 33 No. 2, often referred to in the aftermath as the joke. The composition goes along like any other, but towards the end of the piece, several long pauses lured the audience into applauding at the wrong time. After several more fake-outs, the piece finally ends in the middle of a phrase to assure a confused final applause. Even though the joke is on them, audiences on that evening and for centuries after have enjoyed the piece for its innovative incorporation of the crowd and humorous break from seriousness. Many romantic poets and writers keen on satire were trolls of their time. This includes a young Lord Byron, who before his illustrious poetry career, when he was a student at Trinity College in 1805, read that the school prohibits pet dogs. Discouraged by this strict rule, he decided to adopt and bring a tame bear with him to school instead, since the college had no exact ruling on bears. He eventually won his argument against Trinity, and the bear reportedly would accompany him in his lodging. He even suggested he would try to apply the bear to the school, though this never ended up happening. Living a provocative and exceptionally scandalous life in the years following, with his satirical and establishment-mocking poetry spreading around the world, Lord Byron enjoyed the power of shock value, a commonality for internet trolls today. In the latter part of the 19th century, U.S. businessman Brian G. Hughes, known for manufacturing paper boxes and founding the Dollar Savings Bank and making a fortune, decided to use his wealth and spare time to not make the world better, but to troll the public instead. Using the masquerade of his wealth, he once donated a New York mansion to a historical society, claiming it was owned by Lafayette during the Revolutionary War, which turned out to be a dilapidated house in the Bronx. Hughes is also rumored to have dropped fake diamonds around New York's Tiffany's and watched gullible people try to pick them up, mocking the commoners. In perhaps his most famous prank, he adopted an alley cat for 10 cents and entered it into a prestigious cat show as the last of the Dublin Brindle breed, naming it Nicodemus and pampering it in a gold-plated cage with a silk cushion, surrounded by roses and its own human nurse. Nicodemus was a hit at the show and received offers exceeding $2,000. Though often satirizing society, it is curious that Brian G. Hughes enjoyed trolling people often less fortunate than him. Marcel Duchamp, born in 1887, was a successful French Cubist painter who did not care for the conventions of art history and even the modernist movements he was a part of. His painting Nude Descending a Staircase No. 2, portraying just that, stirred much controversy in the Cubist movement and around the art world in general. Before displaying it around the world at various conventions, sure to stir much controversy because of its provocative nature, the Cubists pushed Duchamp to pull his painting from the 1912 Cubist Salon des Indépendants, and disappointed, Duchamp decided to take the painting down and get a cab. He later described, "I went immediately to the show and took the painting home in a taxi. It was really a turning point in my life, I can assure you. I saw that I wouldn't be very much interested in groups after that." Perhaps this scarring moment would fuel the rest of his career, which would become increasingly more trollish. Indeed, it is hard to pin down what makes trolling so attractive to some people. The disdain for societal conventions often can come from events in which the prospective troll felt slighted by society, and thus their rigor is fueled by exposing its hypocrisy. This might have been the case with Duchamp, who decided to double down, abruptly ending his painting career, vowing to leave behind retinal art in favor of art based off of solely conceptual concepts. During this time in his studio, he had a bicycle wheel upside down on a stool he would often spin, which inspired his next great avant-garde adventure, the ready-made, finding prefabricated, often mass-produced objects isolated from their intended use and elevated to the status of art by the artist choosing and designating them as such. During the time's rapidly changing art avant-garde, creating works that previously would have never been considered art before the modernist movement, ready-mades asked the question very directly, what is art? And Duchamp fully dived into this concept to the greatest possible degree, picking these objects based off of what he called, quote, visual indifference. His first official ready-made was the bottle rack in 1914, a bottle drying rack he found at a Parisian department store, and signed by Duchamp with a pseudonym, and it received very skeptical reviews. His sisters reportedly threw out the bottle rack, mistaking it for rubbish when cleaning out his apartment, which perhaps makes the controversial art piece's legacy even more epic. He would continue with creating, or finding ready-mades for the next few years, and really got the art world in a frenzy in 1917 with his ready-made fountain, a bathroom urinal he signed with the pseudonym R. Mutt. Originally rejected by art shows as simply not art, its very trolling nature of extending what art could be to the greatest length made the piece very famous and an emblem of the question of what is or isn't considered art. Controversial even to this day when seen at museums, it is regardless considered by art historians as one of the most influential pieces of art in the entire 20th century. Finally, his 1919 parody of the Mona Lisa, a cheap reproduction with a hastily sketched mustache and a goatee, inscribed LHOOQ, alluding to the French obscenity, politely translated as, there is a fire down below, which was perhaps the ultimate FU to the history of art before him and his snobby critics, polarizing those who think it isn't serious art and offensive with people who are willing to be open-minded to the greatest possible extent. In essence, Duchamp is a great example of how trolling can be annoying and distracting, but in the midst of controversy, can ask important questions that were never properly considered before. Trolls have always gravitated towards politics, and today's internet trolls might often be more associated with the right wing of the political spectrum, but this has not always been true. In the late 1960s, the left-wing Youth International Party, or better known as the Yippies, were counterculture activists, particularly known for their trolling tactics during the turbulent times. Right before the group was officially formed, in protest of the Vietnam War, the Yippies organized a march on Washington, D.C. in 1967, calling it satirically the Grand Anti-War March, and staging a satirical levitation of the Pentagon, using meditation and chanting, mocking the idea that traditional protest methods were effective or even meaningful, creating a spectacle that would force the media and public to take notice. This was followed by the Yippin at the New York Stock Exchange in 1968. Perhaps unknowingly nodding to John G. Hughes, they threw tons of fake and real US dollars from the visitors' gallery balcony to the traders below. Some of these traders would boo the performative stunt, while others frantically rushed towards the cash. As the 1968 election approached, frustrated with the major political candidates of the year, the Yippies famously organized a Festival of Life to coincide with the 1968 DNC in Chicago, which they dubbed the Festival of Death. Amongst other acts of debauchery such as a tongue-in-cheek threat to contaminate the water supply with LSD, and a promise to throw nails from overhead at cars to disrupt traffic. Yippies promoted their candidate for president, Pegasus, which not only mocked the caliber of the presumptive candidate Hubert Humphrey, but also the police who did not quite understand the Yippies' trollist humor. The police would quarrel with the protesters, and several nights of disorder ensued, resulting in 11 deaths and loads of injuries and city damage. Indeed, trolling can bring out the worst in everyone around its seductive fangs, but perhaps that's also exactly why it can be so powerful and enlightening as well. The Yippies in the 1968 Chicago DNC protests are also notable, as the live events were novelly broadcast instantaneously around the world, and highlighted the power one could have if you gained the camera's attention. Indeed, the invention of television, much like the internet, created a new bandwidth for trolls to seize on. Comedian Alan Abel was quick to utilize the technology, and in 1959 was able to get a short program on the Today Show featuring the Society for Indecency to Naked Animals, an organization claiming to want to clothe every animal on the planet. Best known perhaps for the tagline, "A nude horse is a rude horse." Summons were created for walking naked dogs, and the organization started to gain attention, with people unaware that it was a prank. The satire was on media censorship and became a frenzy until they revealed it was a hoax in 1962, and unsolicited contributions had to be returned. Amidst the Watergate scandal, Abel posed as a former White House employee, claiming he held the infamous 18.5-minute gap missing from the Watergate tapes. A frenzy of reporters showed up to cover the phony event, not suspecting it could be a prank. Abel went to play the tape and acted shocked in front of the cameras, claiming his tape had also been mysteriously erased. Abel would go on to perform several other successful pranks the next few decades, including a mass faint-in on the Phil Donahue Show.
We've lost another one.
And a proposal to start a school for panhandlers to improve their craft.
Omar is the founder and owner of Omar's School for Begging, which is an institution that teaches the fine art of creative panhandling.
Just like many internet trolls today, he always seemed to be one step ahead of the audience's anticipation. It is a wonder nobody ever caught on to his lifelong dedication to tricking the public. Our last troll, and another comedian who added to the trolling lexicon, was of course Andy Kaufman, the famous 1970s and 80s performer who by all accounts was never not trolling. His signature bits were impersonating a foreign man only singing the line from the theme song to Mighty Mouse, and his other alter ego, the audience-abusing lounge singer Tony Clifton. In one famous act, he just sat in front of the audience and just simply ate a bowl of ice cream. He would become a TV star on the show Taxi, but this didn't mean he would reel in his controversial sense of humor. Infamously, he wrestled women, and in talk show appearances would act purposely awkward. It was rumored he would often talk about faking his own death, which subsequently became a popular conspiracy theory that even lives on today, after he died of lung cancer in 1984. His family account and the Los Angeles police have supplied the death certificate, so this is still somehow one whole intricate joke. It's been 40 years now waiting for the punchline, but perhaps it's impressive to consider his unpredictable trolling past carved the way for some to believe his ongoing bit might still be possible, and thus immortalizes him in the minds of some, even today. As you have seen, the sport of trolling has always been around throughout history, but as technology and particularly communication has progressed, it has become easier for the common person to partake in. For example, in the middle of the 20th century, ham radio jamming would become popular with the proliferation of the radio, as well as crank calling with the invention of the home telephone. With the expansion of cable television in the early part of the 21st century, trolling would no longer only be reserved for unexpected stunts, but became a popular form of comedy enjoyed by the masses, mastered by famous trolling celebrities such as Stephen Colbert, Sacha Baron Cohen, and Nathan Fielder. But of course, the biggest innovation in the history of communication, and subsequently trolling, would be the invention of the internet and social media. Now trolling is as easy as typing into a comment section or a Reddit thread, with the easy option of being anonymous and available to anyone, with very little effort needed. Indeed, the conditions for trolling have never been more fortuitous, and though it might be a consolation to know that trolling has roots in the past, its prevalence today is far more notable than any time throughout history. It seems if given the opportunity, humans love trolling each other, and there is no reason to think it will slow down, as communication presumably will become even easier in the decades ahead. So if you're a troll, rejoice in your ever-expanding landscape of freedom, and if you hate trolls, I would suggest learning how to deal with them, because as history would suggest, they aren't going away anytime soon. Thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing, and check out another video.